I should preface this by saying that this is an extremely complicated and personal experience, and I will try my best to abridge it. Names and any identifying information will not be used here. I have always had struggles with mental health issues from a young age, and by the time I was 15, things had become unmanageable for my parents. They decided to send me to a lockdown school after my freshman year in high school. I literally woke up one morning to two strangers in my home threatening me and telling me that I was going to a boarding school and that if I refused, they would cuff me. To make this story short, I went. After a wilderness program, I was enrolled into a residential treatment facility. The school I was enrolled in was affiliated with some very abusive lockdown schools in the US, many of which have been, thankfully, shut down due to abuse. The school was extremely abusive. Isolation, forced medication, physical intervention, stress positions, attack therapy, withholding exercise and food, etc. were all common occurrences here. The detailed story of what happened here does not pertain to the one I am expressing here. What does need to be said is that the school took me, an already somewhat mentally ill child, and made everything a million times worse. If I had been a troubled boy before I came here, I was much worse off after just a few days. I became a shell of a person and was disassociated most of the time as I knew no other way to cope. A couple weeks or so after I arrived, a boy named James came into our unit. This is where the experience I'm trying to convey here really begins. I hated James at first. He rubbed me the wrong way and I went out of my way to be an asshole to him. However, we ended up being in the same room together and things began to change. I began to become enamored with him. We began spending a lot of alone time together, bonding. I didn't know it at the time, but I slowly began to fall in love with him. I identified as heterosexual, so to me it was more of a brotherly love bond, even though, looking back, there were covert signs of a possible romantic relationship between us. Things at this school became worse and worse, and James and I sheltered each other from the storm of abuse. We were all that we had. We suffered horrible experiences together, and through that bond of trauma, something was created for us. I absolutely needed James to survive. It was like he was a part of me. Without him, I felt empty. He reciprocated these ideas, and we promised each other that we would never be apart and would continue our relationship as soon as we left this school. Luckily, James and his family lived only an hour away from my parents' home. The day came where he was discharged from the school. I was scheduled to go back without him, but after begging and pleading with my parents, I was allowed to be discharged as well. Overjoyed, I called James and told him the good news. He and I began seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week, and it was truly one of the happiest times of my life. He was my world, the only one that knew the terror of what I'd been through. After a while, however, his parents noticed that James was overly physically affectionate with me, and also noticed how emotionally attached I was. I will never truly know the reason behind what happened next. I can only guess. I received an email one day from James. It stated that he thought we should spend less time together, and also included a barb at the bottom of the letter. James and I used to tell each other we loved one another, and he would say that he loved me with 99% of his soul, as it couldn't be 100% because he didn't love himself. At the bottom of the email he said, P.S. It's 72% now. I completely lost it. I grabbed the nearest sharp object and slashed at my wrists, screaming, crying, begging. How could this be? I could not accept this. No one would ever understand me except for him, and I couldn't breathe without him. We saw each other a couple more times after this, but it was all different now. He was different now. After the last time I saw him, he told me he wanted to cease contact completely. It started with phone calls. I knew his house phone number and his cell, and I would call all day, sometimes not saying anything. Other times, begging in tears for him to see me, to love me again. I would beg his parents, plead with them, Then it escalated. I began to call his mother's cell phone, his mother's work phone. I obtained his father's cell phone and work phone as well, and I would call those numbers again. Sometimes I would plead. Other times, I wouldn't say anything at all. I would also manipulate a mutual friend of ours to call these numbers with me on the line, and I'd have her ask specific questions. Eventually, they had to change all the numbers in the house. Before James requested to have no contact, we used to attend a church group together. I still knew where it was located and knew that he still went. I was dating a much older girl at the time, and I would have her drive me to the group so that I could try and see him. The first couple times, he didn't show up, but I made sure to ask everyone there for information on him. The third time I showed up, he was there. I approached him and asked him if he really didn't love me at all anymore. He looked me in the eyes and said, no, he didn't. I broke down in tears, begging him, causing a scene, until he was asked to leave. It must have been humiliating for him. He also identified as heterosexual. I then had my girlfriend at the time drive by his house at the middle of the night with me, and I would stare up at his window. This happened at least twice. I would just sit there and stare. I also had her knock on the door a couple times as well to ask if James was home. Time passed, and I somehow was able to convince James to add me as a MySpace friend. This gave me hope that our relationship could be rekindled, though deep down, I knew better. I realized that he had a girlfriend, and I messaged her. I manipulated her to meet me in person, under the pretense that he not be told of our meeting. We met soon after, and I seduced her. I had her call him and ask if he had any desire to be my friend again. He said that he had no desire and that he pitied me. Again, I lost it. I continued to seduce his girlfriend and gained all sorts of private information from her, including the new house phone number, his new cell phone number, his MySpace password, their sexual activities, and family information. I hacked into his MySpace and shut it down. I then blew up the house phone and his cell. I screamed at his mother and gloated to him about how I had used his girlfriend. They had to change all of their numbers again. After one final phone call with James and his girlfriend, a switch in my head flipped. I was done. I had to stop this. It was over. I feel terrible for terrorizing this family. I wish that there was some way that I could apologize. I tell this experience to let other people know what it's like to be on the other side of stalking. I was really sick. There was no excuse for my behavior, and I'm lucky I wasn't arrested. There is much more to this story pertaining to what we went through together than what I wrote here, but I hope it can help someone understand why certain people engage in these types of behaviors. Today, I'm a much different person. I still struggle with borderline personality disorder, but I haven't acted out like that since then. I'm very fortunate to have a pretty stable life now, and it took me a few years to get where I am. I hope this may help someone understand more about stalking behaviors.